In the beginning, Io existed alone in the realm of Tikorikari, in his passive state as Io of the slumbering countenance, Io of the calm and tranquil countenance, Io, the unchanging and unadulterated, in whom there is no confusion and inconsistency. Nothing existed before Io, for he alone was the pre-existent as the parentless, the first parent, as the precursor, the first cause, the foundation of all things. Thus begins in Maori history the esoteric as well as a popular version of creation and God. The one was in the keeping of the tohunga or priests. The other was kept alive as fireside stories of the common peoples. Neither contradicted the other. Rather, they supplemented and enriched each other's presentation with practical faith as well as philosophical and allegorical depiction. This is very much similar to the Shruti, Vedas and law books, and Smriti, Puranas, Vedic history, of the Vedic culture of India.
Om Gananam Tva Ganapati Kumbhavamahe Kavim Kavinam Upamashravastamam Jyeshtarayam Brahmana.
Similarities in the Hindu, Indo-Aryan Vedic understanding of God are found with the creative Lord of the universe, Mahavishnu, who rests in divine sleep. Slumbering countenance, tranquil transcendence, who is eternal, unchanging, ever-existent, all pure, never adulterated or contaminated, who is never bewildered, the first primeval being, is never born as we are, and does not have any actual birth parents, being unborn and eternal, although for his loving pastimes he selects his devotees to act as his parents to enjoy parental love. He is the original cause of all causes, the strength of the strong, and the thread upon which everything, as pearls, rests. The universe of Io is a well-ordered creation. The Supreme God has his home in Te Taongarangi, the uppermost heaven. It is unapproachable by the messengers of the lesser gods, except by special permission, and the only door to it lies through Tawirirangi.
The commonality between those things, like you said, is striking. But for me, it's actually the variation of the basic theme, where you have Io as compared to Shiva. Io is a distant god, and to my way of thinking, and this is only my way of thinking, Io is actually a process of creation rather than the god himself. And when he created the darkness or the emptiness or the nothingness and the 7 or the 9 phases of nothingness, that corresponded to the creation of time and space as probably a 14th century pre-contact Maori would have understood the cosmos and finding some way to explain that. And he would have drawn on the oral traditions of his time up to that point to explain this new land, basically. And when I'm talking about 14th century, I'm talking about the accepted view of the Great Fleet, which came about 100 years before that, around about 1350. That is the accepted model. But to me, it's the variation from the basic theme that is more interesting than the commonality. There are always going to be a commonality between these things, but it's the differences that make us unique.
While the similarities are striking, I think we have to be careful that we don't assume that there's some sort of pecking order with some of those traditional atua within the Maori cosmology. While it's certainly true, for example, that there are many stories that talk about Io, some Māori scholars have argued that the attempt to place Io at the top of the pedigree, if you like, is in fact a product of colonial interpretations to ensure that there is one sort of supreme god, if you like. So there is a big debate and controversy about that, obviously, in any community, be it Māori community or Indian community. There's obviously some pretty interesting debates going on about the significance of those particular atua.
For me, there's a temptation to, very much a strong temptation to look at those, parallels and to draw conclusions, so to speak. To me, the cosmological beliefs of the Maori and the Indian people, there are differences, but then again there are certain themes that come through. For example, regarding the origins of the universe, the concept of the spirit soul, transmigration of the soul. There are a lot of themes that come through which maybe hint that in the past Maori people at least had some contact with Vedic culture, whether it was in India or someplace or somewhere else where Vedic culture had been established. I think that is a question that needs to be looked at.
Striking similarities persist on the cosmography of the universe and beginning of creation of the material world. Vedic understanding indicates that Lord Brahma, the secondary creator of this material world, was seated upon a lotus flower, surrounded by waters of the causal ocean, alone in the darkness. He then heard a mystical sound, tapa, tapa, giving direction and inspiration. Māori cultural understanding reflects an incident where Tane, the secondary god of creation, was situated in a very similar situation, in the waters, surrounded by darkness, when he too heard a mystical sound, tapa, tapa.
I think if you look, yes, there are definitely very marked similarities. For example, Krishna has many incarnations. Some specifically deal with the creation of the universe. For example, Mahavishnu. You have secondary creators like Lord Brahma, and in every instance in Maori culture you find similarities. For example, Tane, who was involved with the creation of the universe that we live in. Mahavishnu also. You will find similarities in Maori culture, descriptions that would exactly fit Mahavishnu. So yes, I would say yes, it's true.
Well, I mean, the whole issue around sort of commonalities of cosmologies, I think, is a fascinating one and a really interesting area of research. I think it may open up the door for some interesting, sort of cultural exchanges in the future. So I think there are some sort of valuable aspects to that whole research endeavour, if you like. And certainly, I mean, every time I read, some of the stories of creation from the Aboriginal peoples in Australia through the South Pacific, through right to through to Asia, Southeast Asia, and India in particular. There are some striking similarities, just in terms of broad understandings of our role in the world, where that world came from, and where we go when we ultimately leave the land of the living, if you like. So there are some really interesting sort of areas, I think, for research.
Māori mythology said that everything comes from our genealogy, and that everything goes back to our genealogy. Like you said, we had the supreme being Io, who described everything. Okay, right down to probably the fourth or fifth tier of the gods and the beginning of the gods, Papatūnuku, Ranginui, the sky Father, the separation, which is the creation of everything earth, and the gods going about their business, doing their thing, and Tāne, planting the trees upside down whilst he was pushing his parents away. The pain of birth is, and the grief of it, and the eventual making of man. So as we come through that, we say that Māori did not come from monkeys, we came from the gods, and that we've got a wee bit of the God within us, and that we will carry that around from us, and that all our genealogy goes back towards the gods, and therefore we are the children of the gods.
The strength of Maori culture was transmitted orally through the telling of stories, legends, song, haeta, and the reciting of whakapapa, genealogies. It was also represented in stylized form in carvings and woven panels that adorned whare, meeting houses. When one visits India and parts of Southeast Asia, some of the most prominent things to catch one are the graphic depictions of the pastimes of the Lord, Sri Krishna, Lord Vishnu, and their pastime expansions, or cultural displays of the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, etc., through similar cultural symbology.
Well, the funny thing with oral traditions is a misnomer. It's actually a verbal knowledge system used to explain various types of events that happen in the physical world. That stuff that wasn't easily explained were left to the gods, because the gods knew what they were doing, basically.
Knowledge was transmitted mainly through, obviously, genealogy, stories, and of course waita or songs were some of the key media through which knowledge was disseminated to our people. So yeah, I mean, again, there are some important similarities there.
In Maori culture, I don't think the oral tradition would work today. In previous times, our ancestors, or even up to maybe 2 or 3 generations ago, had very good memories. So they could remember, they had a very good ability to remember things in great detail and remember vast quantities of knowledge in minute details. And if you have a look at all the genealogies today around, you can more or less find, there may be differences, but the main themes come through intact.
Māori was never written. Māori are not written people. We're singers, we're storytellers, we're poets, and fortunately we used to be philosophers.
It is evident that the Maori had a strong sense of taratamiya, hierarchical worship, and varna and ashram, social structure. The Maori had their communities in the same way as the Daivi Varnashram system, with the tohanga giving cultural and philosophical direction, the warriors protecting, and the growing of crops and tending the fields by those who were unskilled in trade or priesthood. When the Maori went to war, the womenfolk would also assist their men, sometimes taking up arms to defend their pa, fortress or village. Nevertheless, as soon as the battle was over, they were again mothers and wives.
Well, there's, as you'll be aware, there's been a very vigorous debate over years about exactly the nature of pre-European Māori social structure. Obviously, since the incorporation of Māori into a contemporary capitalist economy, things are very different. But there are a number of sort of methodological and theoretical difficulties when looking at pre-European Māori society, and there was a tendency in the 19th and 20th centuries to assume that there was some organic hierarchy, of priests and kings and monarchs and so forth, which were very much what the European explorers were looking for when they first arrived in the South Pacific. They were essentially looking at Māori society through their own experience of European society, with its clear distinctions between commoner, feudal lord or aristocrat, and monarchs and kings. I'm not convinced that was necessarily the case in Aotearoa New Zealand. I think it was far more complex than that. Certainly there were tohunga, for example, who were experts in a variety of different pursuits. Some were tohunga or experts in the area of genealogy, others were tohunga in the area of whakairo or the arts, carving and so forth. So clearly there were people in different positions within Māori society, and it seems likely that there was certainly some hierarchy according to genealogy, according to senior and junior lines in whakapapa or genealogy.
That the genealogy is not lineal or patrilineal or matrilineal. It was actually a flat sort of genealogical system that included everything, and therefore even a lowborn or slave can claim relative status to the highest born chief.
I think in modern Maori culture that those distinctions have become blurred, as in any modern culture. But I think if you look pre-industrial, that those social structures are present in any society, albeit Maori culture, Chinese, Japanese, Asian, whatever. Those social structures are very prevalent. My understanding from the traditions that have been passed down to our generation are that at one stage one of the reasons for the migration to New Zealand was a difference of opinion between the priestly class, or the tohungas, and the warrior class. So predominantly the migration to New Zealand was by the warrior class, who were trying to, you could say, escape the control of the priestly class. Now where that migration took place from, I don't know.
With regard to practical day-to-day sacred rites, as in the Vedic Sanskars, the Māori also have a system of daily rites of passage that mark the maturational development of individuals as they grow, create offspring and pass on. The practical role of the priesthood, tohangas, is also almost identical in function with those of the purohits, domestic priests of India. The tohanga would be employed to consecrate new buildings, to bless warriors going into battle, to bless new structures or buildings, performing birth ceremonies, name-giving, and last rites. Much of the rhyme and reasoning was the same as India, differing only in the practical application according to linguistics and family tradition in ritual symbolism. The tohanga's function, like that of the Brahmins, is to serve, support and knit together the conditional stages of the people to directional development towards their constitutional positions as sons and daughters or servants of the Supreme God, Io and Krishna, through which Varna, social functionality, and ashram, passage of spiritual shelter, works.
आयतनवान् भवति यो वायोरायतनं वेद आयतनवान् भवति आपो वै वायोरायतनम् आयतनवान् भवति य एवं वेद योपामायतनं वेद आयतनवान् भवति असौ वै